Hello to everybody. I hope you can hear me. This is the third ELTA live webinar. Today, the topic we have chosen is a very challenging one. Which technical skills do lawyers need to acquire? We have been questioning ourselves in ELTA whether we lawyers need to learn how to code. Do we need to understand Java, Python, HTML? Shall we learn to write blockchain? Are we going to do ourselves the smart contracts? Are we going to use other people? Are these the only technical skills, coding, or are there other technical skills that technicians normally have, like lean methodology, project management, design thinking? Are they also interesting to us? Should we learn about it? Okay, today we decided to look for people who knows about the skills, who knows about what lawyers are learning all over the world, and they are going to discuss with us about this interesting topic. Let me first explain you the program for this afternoon, morning for some people, also for some of our speakers. Thank you, Dan, for waking up so early to be with us. Thank you, Dirk. I think that you're in Chicago as well. Thank you for getting up so early. And thank you, Sara, for sharing your afternoon with us. So thank you to all of you who decided to listen to these speakers and to be with us. 3 speakers, they will speak and tell us their views on the topic. Once they finish, you will have the chance to pose your questions, and we will try to answer. If there are many questions, we will be forced to make a selection of the ones which we consider more accurate to clarify the topic, and you can always send your questions to ELTA so that they are addressed to the speakers and they answer to you directly in some days. Let's start first with Sara. Let me introduce you to her. She is a partner at the leading international executive search firm AltoPartners. She's also a member of the board of the insurer AXA in Spain. She's a lawyer, but she has been working in management and in several companies from both the public and the private sector. She is also a fighter. She's trying to help women to improve in their careers. She's looking for a better position for women. She's giving a lot of speeches on this topic and also making research to help us to understand what we have to do to get where we are capable of getting. So Sara, can you please give us your view on this fascinating topic of shall we lawyers learn to code? Shall we lawyers learn other things? What do you think, Sara?
Thank you, Chusa. Good afternoon to everybody. So let me start a little bit talking about this topic that we all know, that internet technology has changed the whole world, and now it's like a tsunami area because clients have changed, the administration has changed, and that's the relationship with the lawyers has to change because it's a must. But the technology has come to help us to give a better service. But we have to understand the best way we can give that service because our clients are waiting for that. And that's why if we want to digitalize, we can think about the 3P. What do I mean by 3P? 3P, the first one should be the platforms. So we need the technology for hardware or software. We need to think about having our data in the cloud. We really have to understand what can we use, all these kind of robots, all this kind of data analytics, the artificial intelligence that is now working more and more for us. So those platforms, we really need to know that they are there to help us. The second P should be processes. Processes, I think lawyers have normally they work with processes, but now the effort is to understand how can we digitalize our processes? How can we manage a document in a better way? How can we have a better process to facilitate the relationship with the client or with the administration? Because really they are going to ask us for that. So the clients now are used to getting to the information. It's not like before, some years ago, when really the information was in a book or was in a written, and there was stock in any place. Now the info is much closer to the people, and so it's very important that all this process, all this data, we have to know where they are and how we can give the clients, the interesting ones, and really make them able to get into this info. And the third piece should be people. And perhaps people is the most difficult, because now we have many lawyers that they are even in their 40s and 50s, they are working, and changes are difficult for everybody, and usually we are quite resistant for changes. And this is something that really is the most important. All of us, we have to understand that we have to arrive to this datification that they are calling that. And what I think is that really we need to have these new skills that they are calling I think is a very smart way, which is STEM empathy. I mean, a mix between being more science and technology and mathematical minds, but not losing all this empathy that it has been so important regarding the way we treat clients, the way we talk to them, what they make us humans. And because robots are more and more giving us the possibility to work with the clients in a different way, we think that the most important will be treating the clients and doing the relationship with them in another way, being much more marketing oriented, because perhaps we have to sell our products, our service in a different way, because they are saying that many machines will help the litigations in a different way. So the lawyer will have to sell. So why not to study more marketing, but probably digital marketing, as many people is doing now in the webs, and to have a person that manage a social CRM, traffic manager. So I would like to leave here the idea that really my impression, being a headhunter and working for some law firms, is that more and more to be a lawyer as a specialist is not probably that necessary, because many times we are finding teams where they work different, they put different knowledge together, and the specialization is not that important, but to work in teams, to be close to the client, to understand them, to be much more strict in timings and into this information that they need. And so we will probably see that in the law firms, other professions will arrive, and many of them related to digital, like being responsible for digital, for the projects, now people for the digital transformation, that they are not lawyers at all, but they need to make lawyers understand how important it is. And all this digital world will be in our daily life in a very short time. I think it's a good time for my colleagues to talk, and perhaps we can share later.
Thank you very much, Sara. I really like your idea of thinking of the 3 Ps to structure the challenges that lawyers have to answer when thinking of digital transformation and platform people and processes are key, and apparently in order to be able to cope with those challenges, new skills are necessary. And I really like your idea of the STEM and emotional STEM. I think this emotional STEM can probably come from the fact that we lawyers should learn and should play and work more and more often together with technicians, so that they understand more our skills and our way of working, and we understand more their skills and way of working. Let's go with the second speaker, Dan Lear. He's a lawyer, a blogger, and an legal industry gadfly. I think, Dan, you have to explain me that terminology. I'm sorry, but that's really, I think, slang, and I hope that you can explain me what it means, because I'm sure that is something interesting that we should know about. He has done something very interesting, which is not only being a lawyer, but also working in a legal tech, in AVO, one of the most admired legal techs I know, and it's an online legal marketplace. So he can probably share with us, before telling his views on the topic, how is working in such a legal platform for a lawyer, because I think that you have been a traditional lawyer and then you jump into this other business, the alternative services providers. Dan has got many recognitions and prizes and awards, but he has told me not to mention everything that is written in this, in my opinion, short bio. Is probably the Spanish way. We have very long bios. This is for us very short, but I don't want to give more information. I want you to tell us a little bit about your experience in AVO and then your views on the topic. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Maria. It's a pleasure to be with you today. First things first, the gadfly reference is actually a reference to Socrates. Back in his apology, he says societies need a gadfly to sting the steed of the state into acknowledging its proper duties and obligations. And so I sort of see myself as a gadfly in the legal industry to sort of prod and poke and annoy. I think it's also a reference, I'm sure we've all seen horse flies that fly around horses and sting them and really annoy them. And that's sort of how I see myself in the legal sector, as someone who is annoying and prodding and poking and reminding of our duties and our higher obligations. So that's where that came from. And yes, so my background, as Maria mentioned, I was a technology lawyer. I actually worked during law school at Microsoft as a paralegal, and then transitioned from that role into a technology lawyer. And I did that work for about 6 years, and then sort of in the later stages of that period, got very interested in the intersection of law and technology. I mean, particularly, I saw the way that my software clients were working. I saw the technologies they were working on. I saw the kinds of things that they were doing to push other industries forward. And I would then return to my office and do things in pen and paper, and was particularly inadept with Microsoft Word. And just, I saw that so much of what we did seemed to me so inefficient, and also, and this will sort of segue nicely into my points today, also didn't really seem to be forwarding or moving anything forward. And again, perhaps the answer to the question is that I just chose the wrong profession. but I also feel very strongly about the role that legal folks can and should play in society. And I certainly have a vision about who they are and what they could be. And so I hope, again, in my gadfly activities, that I am prodding the state or moving the state of the industry forward. And yes, and so I've also, again, I've worked as a lawyer, and then for the last 4 years, I've worked at Avo. I'm actually leaving Avo at the end of this week. I'll be doing some independent consulting work in the legal technology space, working with both lawyers who are trying to figure out how to sort of get into this space or be more entrepreneurial. And again, that's what I'll speak to a bit today. But also doing consulting for legal technology companies. And just in the event that I forget it, if folks want to be in touch with me afterward, and again, maybe you'll share this information, Maria, but I'll just share it right now. Folks can catch me on Twitter at rightbrainlaw, RIGHTBRAINLAW, rightbrainlaw. That's my handle. And then you can also email me, dan@rightbrainlaw.co. And I welcome, if we don't have questions or you have any questions about what I'm up to or all the crazy stuff that we're doing here in the States, folks are welcome to reach out to me. So my take on this particular topic, as you can probably already tell just from having heard me speak for a few moments, I am never shy to either have or express my opinions or thoughts. But my take on this, or my sort of passion about this, really comes from one key place, and it really gets back to what I was saying a moment ago, which is I believe, and I think Sara hit these notes very nicely, that the digital frontier is upon us. And I personally believe that the opportunity that this era presents for us as legal professionals, not only to serve our clients better, but to really think about how we can remake the justice system, how we can remake the legal sector to be more efficient, to be more effective, to help more people, is a tremendous opportunity. And so what I want for legal professionals, and what I hope they would see themselves as, at least some portion of them, is as builders. I think lawyers and legal professionals tend to frequently see themselves in a very reactive place. Clients come to them with problems, and legal folks try to fix those problems. They try to make the problems go away. They advocate on behalf of the client, but they never actually step back and say, hey, this system that my clients are engaged in, or the system that I'm working in, is it the right system? Is it the way we should be solving these problems? And actually, can we potentially build something that's better? And so I really want to encourage legal folks to be builders. And again, I think we also just tend to be reactive generally, right? I mean, I think we're trained to be risk averse. We're trained to spot the issues. But at least what I see in the States, and I think what I know about the legal tech movement in Europe, is that increasingly a lot of folks who don't come from a legal background see the opportunities for change in this sector and are coming in and forcing the change, or making the change, or building this infrastructure for us or around us. And so I want, to me, the most effective way that legal professionals can participate in this change is to be builders. And the best tools that they have are the tools of sort of digital construction, which are varied, to be frank. And increasingly, I don't know that you need specific knowledge of Python, and I'll talk a little bit about coding languages in a minute, or JavaScript, or any of these other specific languages in order to be a builder. It certainly can help, and again, I'll speak to that in a moment. But what I want is for legal folks to embrace this frontier and start building any way that they can, whether that's using Google Forms to build a simple tool that informs clients more effectively about their legal rights, whether that's using a tool like WordPress or something that you folks may have in Europe that helps you build websites, whether it's using logic tools like Neota Logic or other types of tools. What I want is lawyers to stop being so reactive and so responsive and to embrace this opportunity that's before them. Again, both because it is a tremendous opportunity, but also because if we don't, someone else will do it. As far as this question of like, should lawyers learn to code? You can look on the web. I've had a bunch of back and forth, both Twitter arguments and blog posts on this topic about what I think about where we should land. And I've probably gotten into fights with people who are way smarter and way more qualified to have this debate than I have. Specifically, I was going back and forth with the chief product officer at LegalZoom, a guy by the name of Eddie Hartman, who is really funny. Eddie is a professionally trained programmer and effectively a self-trained lawyer. In California, you can still do what's called writing for the bar. And again, I don't want to get too complicated because I know that different jurisdictions are different. But in the US, in nearly every state, in order to practice law, you have to go to law school and then sit for our bar exam. But in a few states, under a few circumstances, you can actually sort of become a lawyer by tutoring under another lawyer. And so Eddie, very interestingly, is a professional programmer and a self-taught lawyer. I am a lawyer by profession and a very, very poor programmer who's only dabbled, but a strong advocate for lawyers to learn to code. And Eddie and I have gone back and forth, and you can read those. At the end of the day, my biggest argument is lawyers need to stop being reactive and start being builders, and I think he and I agree to a large extent there. But as far as what kinds of languages, and I guess that's the reason I brought that up too. One of Eddie's strongest arguments is lawyers should not be coders because they will never be competent to ship production code. They'll never code as well as they possibly could law, if you will, or lawyer. And my argument about that, and Dirk is going to jump into this in great detail, is that's not my point, right? I think you can learn a lot by shipping some kind of an MVP or something that's really simple or just thrown together about what your clients want, and that will have very minimal risk to their legal rights. But more than that, I want lawyers to engage with these tools. I want them to be more proactive because, again, it's such an opportunity, and because if we don't do it, someone else will do it. As far as recommendations about what kinds of languages should we learn, again, Dirk is more qualified to speak to this. I know there are folks who have written a lot of different articles. There's coding for lawyers out there. People are increasingly building technical certificates, and I look forward actually to all of your questions to discuss sort of what could lawyers learn. My understanding, and again, I've dabbled with this a little bit, is that Python is pretty easy to get started with, and it's also a pretty sort of simple language to use. It has a lot of web-based applications. I've heard PHP and Rails are sort of also in that same category, though each can be harder or easier and have less applications. JavaScript is also obviously very popular, and one that a lot of lawyers know, or a lot of programmers can easily pick up and learn. Those are the places that I would start. I'll also, if you're completely new to coding, one interesting way to get started is to just get yourself familiar with Markdown on or is it markup? I always forget, on on GitHub. That's a language that I've dabbled with a little bit, and it can give you like some super basic tools. Also, one other resource that I really like is David Colarusso's Q&A markup, and you can find that at qnamarkup.org, and I can share that if we have a chat function, I'll see if I can share that. That allows you to build just a very simple interactive question and answer tool, which I think is really neat, and it pretty much walks you through it. It's very simple, but again, if you're just getting started, I think that's a great place to start. I've also suggested that groups like this, or I run a meetup for legal technology in Seattle, where I'm based, and I've suggested that we could get together just for 2 or 3 hours and do like a little Q&A markup hackathon and see who can build the most interesting a little Q&A tool using that. So I think that can be fun. Those are the places that I think you could get started. I do think that, you know, channeling Eddie Hartman, I think his point is well taken, that like most of us, if we want to pick up coding now, will probably never become production level coders. And I don't think that's actually the point. I think the more important point is that we as legal professionals take a concerted effort to be builders, that we take a concerted effort to take control of our profession, that we take a concerted effort to take control of our careers in building the future of the legal system in the digital landscape. So that's really all I have to say. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions. It's really been a pleasure to be with you. And again, I look forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you so much, Dan. I really like this idea of lawyers becoming builders instead of conflict solvers or risk, let's say, defenders. I really think that we need to do that. The question is, how can we do that? Because in most cases, what corporations or law firms are asking us is to keep on solving conflicts and to keep on looking at risk and assessing them and deciding how to solve them. So that is really probably the first challenge. Can we take the step and go forward and say we want to be a different kind of lawyer? I really like your proposal of getting into this kind of free tools like the one you mentioned, question and answer markup, and just trying through hackathons and competition. I think we lawyers like competing, and I think to do this kind of difficult things is very good to meet together with others and exercise and compete and enjoy together and feel the frustration together. We also have a meetup here. We just set up a meetup on design thinking, which we believe to be one of the skills that could help us from being risk assessors or whatever, or conflict solvers, to jump into the next generation of lawyers, the builders, the one you mentioned, the builders. So thank you so much for sharing your views. And I hope I don't have to learn Java. I already learned WordPress, and it took me really quite a while. And the social networks, Twitter and LinkedIn, are sometimes driving me nuts, so crazy. So such a challenge. We have to learn coding in all these kind of languages. Let's hope not, no? But Dirk, now is your turn. You are the one who is teaching people. You are the one at the university, at Bucerius, leading university on this field, legal tech. Can you please tell us your views on this? Do we have to learn to code, or do we better concentrate on other issues such as learning how to hire the right technologies, how to control the work of the technologies, which I think is a challenge. Do we have to code, or do we have to learn other skills? It's your turn. Thank you. And let me first introduce you. Sorry. Dirk is the Executive Director of Legal Technology at Bucerius Law School, which is located in Hamburg, Germany. He has been working in a boutique for press and media law, and he joined Alma Mater in the year 2014 as a member of the management team. He develops the technology education program for the school and hosts the summer program, which is taking place in a couple of months. You can tell us something about it if you want. He's writing a PhD also on the field of technology and the impact of it in data science and natural language processing. So I think you are the very right person to tell us about what do we have to learn. Thank you, Dirk.
All right, thank you for that very kind introduction of yours. I'm gonna start by saying that I'm joining you from Northwestern Pritzker School of Law here in Chicago. So if there are sometimes students walking by, that's the benefit of being in a university environment. But I think it shouldn't be too loud. Anyway, my perspective really comes from the background as someone in legal education, and that means that when people are joining us at Bucerius, they typically have 5 to 7 years until profession. So we're trying to build skills that are useful in that sort of time frame. And if we say 7 years, that is like 14 full development circles for software. So one of the very first things that are clear is that you can't just teach them how to use software, because by the time they enter the job market, that software will be outdated. And I'm saying that because the perspective, that long-term perspective, might be different to what one or another practicing lawyer is thinking, who needs skills now. But I'm convinced that even if you don't have that much time, you can build up substantial technical skills. And that's my big and central hypothesis is, I believe lawyers should develop a thorough, fundamental understanding of computer technology. And I think the best way to do so is to learn a programming language, not in order, and I agree with Eddie Hartman, not in order to really mass build software, because let's not forget, that's something people get a degree on and then practice for a long time, and they always do it in huge teams. So we're not building professional software, but I want people to understand how computers fundamentally work, and what problems you can solve with the use of technology and what problems you probably can't solve. So that means understanding computers, but that also means knowing a bit about statistics and also generally like keep reading what's going on in the technology world. And I say that against the backdrop of two different personas that we see in education. One of them just wants to be a traditional lawyer or a judge, no particular technology focus. That person needs a fundamental understanding because he will encounter people and he will encounter questions that are deeply ingrained with technology questions. So he has to, even as a judge who'll never probably write his opinions by hand, you will see things going on. You will have to decide cases about people who dispute over some technology related things. And technology as it is today is not intuitive, or we might not have the intuition for the technology world that we have for the physical world. So you have to figure out like what sort of action triggers what sort of results, and that's true for everyone. And then there's the other persona who wants to go on this technology journey and wants to make a career out of it. And that person, of course, needs a little bit more. But as I said, that's my central hypothesis. Those two personas are there. Before I dive into what I think languages people should learn, let me briefly say that we do have a little certificate. It's 6 classes in Bucerius for all our LLB people. It has to do with introduction to computer science, introduction to data science, programming languages for lawyers, and I'm going to drill down there in a second. Ethics of technology, and the hands-on legal technology like project that you have to do. And that is really for everyone, for all our students to do that. And an amazingly high number of students are taking these classes in addition to their normal law classes, because they feel it's an important skill for the future. And the other thing that I just briefly want to mention is the summer program. If you want to look it up, it's buceri.us. Yeah, you see, it's funny because it's spelled Bucerius, right? So buceri.us and -- tech summer. So you'll find it there. It's a 3-week program. Unfortunately, we're booked for this year, but you can look it up and you'll get some inspiration. Oh yeah, my Twitter handle, by the way, is Son of the Fun. Back when I got Twitter, that was kind of what people did, and I refused to change it. So if you want to follow me, I mainly retweet stuff. Go ahead. I never get into fights with prominent people in the legal tech world. So if you're up for that, you probably better look at them stuff, which is pretty good. So to the question of today's seminar, what tech skills should people acquire? Or more precisely, how do we build that fundamental understanding of technology? I say coding is good. And I'm a self-taught Python programmer who's doing okay in solving the problems I encounter, mainly in academic research. And the question is not so much about which language. What I believe people have to learn is, and I'll dive down a bit right now, is one thing is like the algorithmic solution of problems. How do algorithms work? How do you split a problem so that you can solve it with different techniques? How do you take your everyday problem and make it computer solvable? That's something I want people to know. It has to do with formalization. You have to have some sort of an intuitive understanding of storage and time complexity, we call it. So what kind of computing, what kind of computer problem solving takes how much time, how much resources. And in order to do so, it's good to have code written on your own, because then you can say, okay, I can solve it this way, but it takes forever. So better look for another way. And you have a fundamental understanding of computer architecture. Like, I don't know, from bottom to top, you have an assembler. Assembler makes turns code into computer executable machine language. You have an operating system. That's what we know, right? Windows, Mac OS. And then you have programs to use parts of that operating system to communicate with parts of the computer. And that's like at that high level, where you have high level scripting language. That's what we typically refer to as programming language. And most of us use computers through graphic user interfaces. So the nice, colorful, clicky things. And one just should understand how a computer in total works. It shouldn't be a mystery to you. Then I believe there are some basics, like computers execute statements, right? You write something, you give it to the computer, give it an input, it gets you an output. You have to start thinking like that. What sort of input do I have to provide to get the desired output? Then there are we would call that typically an expression, something that returns a value. We have things like variables and functions. So very basically, variables is you can name an object and then say, from now on, this shell holds this information and refer to it. And then by function, I mean very standardized things. Think of function as, for example, plus. Plus is an arithmetic function, or minus. So it's a standardized way of expressing what you do to objects. So those are the basics. Next thing I think are important would be data types. So very elementary. What sorts of data can computers take in? Like integer numbers or float numbers, which basically have to do with the fact that you can have 1.5 instead of just 1. And you have to understand that, just another example, Boolean, so values that can be true or false, because that is under the hood of a lot of the software we're using, and it has to just naturally come along when you think about computer technology. Then, of course, there are combined things, and you can dive into that with a number of classes on the web, but understanding data types is important. There is what we call control flow. So that means conditionals, right? If statements, like if this happens, then that. Else if, do this. Sometimes you have things like loops. So you say, until we reach a certain thing, just loop through the data and look for things. That it sounds abstract, but in the end, it's what makes a difference between you copying and looking at 100 or 100,000 files, having a computer doing it. And so I talked about input output, and I think people should. Are we good? Can you guys hear me? Strangely,
there's some interferences, but I don't know what is happening. Go on and let's see.
Let's see whether it gets better.
Okay.
So I'm talking how is data exchanged? Also, what is the web ultimately? Get a more intuitive understanding of how the internet and the web works. And understand maybe just a couple of applications. Web scraping. How do you collect information from the web without a human doing it? That's something every lawyer can learn. I would personally say go with Python, because you have very early successes, and one computer language, programming language, is as good as other languages to understand these concepts. Then afterwards, choose what you want. And languages are very different for different purposes. But if you start with Python or JavaScript, or don't go with PHP or stuff that's very old, I'd say. But if you go with these things, you learn that, and you can easily adapt it to other languages. So really, the question of which language is not that decisive. So I talked about web scraping. I think 3 more concepts. One is databases. How is data stored? How is data accessed inside a computer system? And I think probably the most important is text mining. There are very easy ways of getting information out of unstructured text. We call, for example, regular expressions. That's something lawyers can use on a daily basis, and that's something you can easily familiarize yourself with. And then there's visualization, of course. So how do I present data? That concludes what I believe is the fundamental knowledge one should have. I'd like to add to that I'm, as I said, language agnostic. I was going to say, I mean, asking people for programming languages is like asking people on the internet, like what Harry Potter house you're in at Hogwarts, or I don't know, which Quentin Tarantino character are you, these kinds of questions. people have opinions on that. It's good people get opinions on that, but don't lose yourself in it. Most importantly, start with whatever language comes handy and solves your problem at hand. I only know Python and some Haskell. Don't learn Haskell because it's tough. Go ahead with Python but if you're like into JavaScript, do that. And then I would say use something that can be executed on your computer that doesn't require particular infrastructure. I'm somewhat skeptic about blockchain only languages like Go. I think they're not good for a start. 2 minutes on blockchain. I believe that we typically should be talking applications, and we should be talking about what sorts of tools do we want to use as end users. And that question is very far away from distributed ledgering technology that typically is way further down in the hierarchy of things. It's good to know what's going on with blockchain, but I don't think you know a particular technical thing. I know what you're saying. Sarah, can you mute your mic? Because I think I'm getting repeated over your computer. Great, thanks.
Over my computer?
Yeah, if you just mute your mic, because I think that's where the feedback comes from.
Si puedes tú quitar el micrófono un momento, Sara.
I'll quickly. And anyway, my long talking thing is almost done. So
okay, now it's better.
I think in order to understand these things, you don't have to deep dive into blockchain, because if you really want to understand blockchain, you got to understand the encryption issue behind that. And frankly, that's not for everyone. That requires really thorough mathematical knowledge. And go to the web, Google. Do I need a blockchain application? There's a very easy graphic that will help you figuring out step by step if you need one. You might need one for very particular use cases, but without going into too much detail, most of the things you guys are using and will be using and don't need distributed ledger. They need a good database. They need to be performant, and most importantly, in legal context, the most important feature of the blockchain, which is generating trust in a trustless environment, we don't need it. We have trusted authorities all over the place. I don't know, land registries, courts, everyone is super trusted. So for the everyday lawyer, I would say, don't worry too much about blockchain. Stay up to date as you stay up to date with any particular technology, but don't specifically get into it. So wrap up of what I said. I say, first thing is, and I might contradict a bit what Sarah says, who stressed soft skills. I say, go for hard skills. By the way, they're called hard skills in this context because they're really hard to acquire. Like learning these things is tough. Learning statistics is tough, but you got to start, and it's not impossible. If someone made it through law school, they're smart enough to figure these things out. It just takes time. Second thing, develop a fundamental understanding of technology and some mathematics is necessary. It doesn't come overnight, but will be a huge advantage in the future. And I think the overall aim must be to create lawyers that are tech savvy enough that they can, one, communicate their needs to professional software developers, saying, this is what I want, this is how I want it to be solved, and then can actually work with them to build things. And then also realize when somebody tries to fool them, because people who write software are very clever and they're very efficient. So they'll ask you a couple of questions. And if you're not on your feet saying, oh, no, I want it to work in both ways, well, then just build it to work in one way, and you'll discover later on. And the last thing is, and that's what I tell the people who take classes with us, is we want people to be ready to then go on and self-educate themselves with what's on the internet. Starting with Codecademy over Coursera to one day maybe Stack Overflow, that professional exchange platform. It's all there, but you need just a little bit of knowledge to be able to deal with all of that. So bottom line, should lawyers learn how to code? Yes, definitely. Is that all lawyers should learn? No, certainly not. That's my part. Thank you.
Thank you, Dirk. Bad news. You brought me bad news.
Sorry.
We have to learn. Okay, I thought I could, find a middle solution. Like, okay, let's not learn, but let's learn how to work with them. But you also mentioned that. I think that probably what will happen in the future is that there will be, of course, the young people who will take courses like the one you are already offering and will be able to code themselves because they are young and open-minded and they have been brought up. I mean, since they were kids, they were a lot of them playing with games and etc. But I don't see people from my generation all getting into these courses, but I see some of them being curious and wanting to be builders, like what Dan said, and wanted to build their own tools. So I think we probably have to think as well of the skills they need, because they are not easy. And I had one of these experiences. You said developers sometimes fool people. Sometimes it's not even that. It's that they get involved with you in a project, like that's what we had, that we were developing an app and they were working very well, but then they became very successful in their jobs, and one day the 5 or 7 who were working with us decided to do other things, and then they gave me all the work we had done, so it's still in a hard disk waiting there because I can read it. So yeah, they didn't fool me. They gave me the work, but it's useless, and that's really a pity. So at that moment, I thought it's a pity that I don't know how to read Android coding or whatever, because maybe I could have gone on with the project, and I had to just give up. Well, thank you all. I don't know if we have questions. Julia.
I think so. I think I have a question. If Julia sent me one.
Yeah, there's one for Dirk. There's one for Dirk. Yeah.
Okay. So the person basically is asking, because I don't know whether you guys can see it, is what my position is on smart contracts, and whether that's not a feature that lawyers should fully involve in, and how that's best done. See, first thing I want to clarify is lawyers think it's something they have to absolutely follow because it's got the word contracts in it, right? Mm-hmm. But smart contracts is not. I mean, it may have similarities to a contract, but fundamentally, it is. You can call many things that are going on the web today a contract. If you make like a GET request on the internet asking for information on a server, it reacts in a particular way and gives information back to you. That is sort of a handshake. That's a contract. Now, smart contracts, of course, I think quite often people think of self-executing contracts. So you define certain circumstances under which particular things shall be triggered. And we all think of Bitcoin interactions. Stuff like when event X happens, I automatically get paid. As long as it's all on the blockchain, nobody can interfere with it, it works. That is not the typical use case of a contract in the real world, I feel. I know that there are people around, some of them very smart, some of them with a lot of money, who try to build self-executing, self-executing traditional legal code, and then a subcategory of that is self-executing contracts. We are in early days of that development. I mean, you can't specify a smart contract, but what we're thinking about is, okay, we have a number of obligations and a number of remedies, a number of things that can happen in particular circumstances, and we want all that to be handled by a computer. And you can do that today. You can trigger these events, but the important question is, how does the real world out there, the one that's not on the blockchain, those events, how do we translate them into something that a computer can execute? And that is something where we're doing fundamental research. I wouldn't know of a single project that has already done it. It's not like you can go somewhere on the web or find a developer and then just buy smart contracts, say, okay, I want to buy a home under these circumstances with these warranties and all. Please do that for me. We're not there yet. I would say follow it, but really right now it's all crypto assets. So if your practice involves crypto assets, securities for initial coin offerings, that sort of thing, it's good to familiarize yourself with that. But most transactions in the real world right now cannot be built into a smart contract, and we don't know where it's going. I say there are a number of projects. I'm involved with one at Stanford University, Codex. It's a joint center between the computer science department and the law school, and it's very early days still. There's something coming up in Singapore. Singaporean government is big on that. But we're really talking things that maybe what comes closest to a smart contract today is interbank exchange, right? Trading, automatic trading. These are smart contracts today. You'll define particular circumstances and they're automatically executed. I bet those of you who are in that sort of business as lawyers, you don't have any problem solving the conflict arising out of it without getting deeply into the technicalities of how they work. So I think don't worry too much, keep reading on it, but just because it has contracts, it doesn't mean that has to be your area of expertise. That's my 2 cents. If anyone else wants to weigh in.
Yeah, I definitely want to weigh in. So again, Dirk already called me out as someone who likes to pick fights, but I'm usually pretty polite about it, and I'm not going to pick a fight here. But I want to mostly agree with you, but also maybe add in what I think is some color around this topic, because I've been paying attention, and I wouldn't say deeply, but I've been paying attention to blockchain for a while. And I do think there are some interesting pieces that I definitely don't think that the first thing that you should do after you get off this webinar is go and figure out how to build a blockchain application. Like, don't do that. But I think there are some pieces here that I think are actually really relevant, and I would argue in the near term more relevant. And so let me briefly make my case. So one thing that I think is really just maybe it's a historical, a piece of historical, just kind of an interesting historical fact, but I sort of think it's relevant. And again, if you dive really deeply into the history of Bitcoin, there's this sort of mysterious figure by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto, who is maybe a few people, maybe it's one person, no one really knows, who was sort of like the person who put all of the pieces together to sort of make make Bitcoin go, which I think was really the proof of concept for blockchain. And you can really nerd out about this. The place where I'm going is one of the people who is speculated to be Satoshi Nakamoto is a gentleman by the name of Nick Szabo, who turns out went to law school. And actually went to law school in the city I currently reside, Seattle, just up the road, the University of Washington Law School. And I think that, and he's been a big advocate both of blockchain and of smart contracts. And I do think there's an element of, and I'll talk to this in a minute, but I think there's an element of what these technologies do that is very relevant for lawyers. And I think the fact that he's a lawyer, and certainly if he's not Satoshi Nakamoto, he was one of the earliest people who could have put the pieces together as far as what the potential for these technologies. And so I think that's relevant. As far as smart contracts, I actually do think smart contracts have and again, I mostly agree with Dirk that it's still early days. In fact, I would completely concur with him that it's still early days. However, I think the potential of smart contracts to change things in the near term might be greater than he suggested. And here's why, and this is an example from Nick Szabo. We already have smart contracts in the real world. A vending machine is a smart contract. You put your money in and you get something out. A smart contract to a large degree, and again, I'll defer to Dirk if he wants to correct me, but he really, I think, pretty much said this. In the States, we call them contracts of adhesion, where we basically say, if you do this, then we will have a contract and I will automatically be obligated to validate that contract and perform. And that's really what smart contracts are, at least in my understanding, is they are a technical implementation of these contracts of adhesion. Now, they do not have a lot of the flexibility built in that I think a lot of us like. I was a contract lawyer for a number of years, and by that I mean a lawyer who worked on contracts. They don't have a lot of the flexibility I think that a lot of us want from contracts built into them. But they are contracts, and in my mind, they are mechanical executions or technical executions of contracts. And I think that the potential to use them and the potential for them to have an impact on the way we as lawyers do business, I think, is actually nearer term than I think Dirk said. But again, we may be nitpicking. The final piece that I think is definitely worth deeper discussion is the blockchain's role as a trusted entity. And I actually would argue that That is a huge piece of the role that lawyers and the legal profession plays today. Certainly, and to Dirk's point, you know, there are land registries, and I mean, in the States we have the Social Security Administration. I mean, we have this whole issue around what your how you should be able to control your own private data. And again, I think it's pretty, like, what I've heard blockchain technology described in a number of different ways, but whether it's a publicly open ledger, whether it's I've heard it described as digital scarcity in a world of digital ubiquity. But I think this piece of trust, where it's something that we all can agree on, that's a pretty key. I mean, that's why we have lawyers as or legal folks as notaries, right? Is and again, in the States, we lawyers are not notaries, but I know in South America, and I think probably in much of Europe, lawyers in some cases they are first notaries, right? Because we said this is something that our system of government, our collectively agreed society has said, like, this is approved, right? And you put your stamp on it. That is precisely what the blockchain is very good at doing, is saying this is something that we all agree on. Whether it's a resolution through some kind of a tribunal, whether it's validation of the ability of someone to execute a contract, whether it's simply the demonstration that an individual is who they say they are. And these are the things that blockchain is incredibly good at doing. I'd also say, to Dirk's point about banks, I think the financial services sector should really be thinking deeply about blockchain, because what banks are, and to some extent an extension of that, what lawyers have done for banks, is like, they are a transaction cost, right? The fact that we have to have these interbank transfers and this complicated way of moving money is a function of the fact that we have this fiction that is fiat currency. And again, we can nerd out about this at length. But the point is, banks are a transaction cost, and lawyers are a transaction cost of banks, and to a large degree. And what blockchain technology does is it cuts a lot of that out and enables you to transact directly using, whether it be digital goods or digital currency, with another person. And I would argue, again, I'm nerding out, but to bring it all back, to a large degree, in a lot of these transactions, the folks who do legal work are transaction costs. It's this cost of, we have to have someone sort of looking over how this transaction works, ensuring that it's valid, and a lot of that, I think, can be changed or done more automatically by blockchain technology. So I don't think Dirk and I are totally far. I see him nodding for the most part. I think maybe our biggest debate would be how soon this is coming and how big its implications are. But one thing I would absolutely say, I completely agree that you should not go and write blockchain applications tomorrow unless you have some crazy crypto dream, which, again, like, good luck with that. But I actually think these technologies will have a pretty significant impact on the way the legal system works, and I think it has a potential to have an impact on the way that legal professionals work. And so I would argue that it's something you should definitely be keeping a close eye on.
Thank you, Dan. Sara, do you want to say something about this, or? No? Okay. So, okay, then let me tell you my views on this, because I was very interested listening to the two of you. I think I'm more with Dan in how I see the future. I really think that blockchain, or maybe the next technology, because they are talking now about what is that? Quantitative? I don't know. Quantum technology. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know about it. If you want to tell us something later about it, Dirk, it will be great. But I think that there are two trends which are undiscussable. One is globalization and the needs of the legal system to change in order to cope with those challenges. And second is consumer and how the consumer behaves, reacts, needs, etc. And I think these two trends are key to what is going to happen. The world is global, no barriers, international trade, internet, and what is clear right now is that the system, the legal systems, the national legal system are not capable to give answers to all the challenges that happen daily. And I have a sentence that I use sometimes is that I rather hire a communicator than a lawyer when I have a legal conflict. And I think that that's one of the biggest risks we have. If I can solve my legal issue better with, let's say, a community manager, just using some sentences properly positioned in Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, than going here to the police or to the consumer institution, we have a problem. I think we have a problem, and that is what is happening here, that people want to protect their reputation more than their legal risk. And that's a big challenge. And there technology plays a role. The second thing is consumers' power and consumer needs. I see now a trend that is not going to stop, and is the transparency. I think that we consumers are a bit silly yet, but we will become more and more intelligent, and we need transparency because we are starting to understand that internet and all these platforms are great, but I'm not taking free decision. I don't know what is behind it. I don't know what is happening. And I think that all which has to do with, let's say, smart contracts, but not in the sense of smart contracts in the technological sense, but smart contracting. Because I think one of the problems we have is that the contracts we are using now are not smart. They're very silly. They're very tricky. They're very long. They're unclear. Consumers don't want that. And I think the moment consumers start asking, and even companies start asking their lawyers to draft better and clearer contracts, I guess that smart contract, the real technology, will be easier. The problem now is that the kind of contracts that are drafted are so confusing, so complicated, so, let's say, far away from the algorithm needs, that the smart contract is not so far the best technology for the contracting world. But I think the more we will go into this transparency and clearer and simple trend, the more these solutions for transaction will be used. I don't know if I explain myself properly because it's a bit deep what I was saying, and I probably need more time to explain this theory about consumer experience and what consumers are asking now and demanding, and what the new regulations from the European Union I think are going to be working in the future. I think there is a big trend pro transparency and forcing companies to be clear about what they are giving us, how they are giving us these responses to our queries in internet, etc. I don't know if you see it that way, yeah?
Yeah, I would like to agree with you very, very much, and I think that even if we have robots like, probably you know, Ross, this Canadian robot that has been trained with all this machine learning, and he knows everything about laws in Canada, and I think also in the States, and this robot can process laws and all this, even all these regulations, and it's based in artificial intelligence. So it will be developed and more developed. So at the end of the day, some robots in every country will let us know what's going on and how it will be really proper decision, and they are saying that laws are decreasing their work in the States because of that, because people is trying to get these decisions made in a more transparent way at the end of the day, making comparison. So I agree 100% that probably is the customer who is leading this tendency, which is everywhere, and probably blockchain will help, because in insurance is working more and more, because if you have insurance for anything, I mean, something like the rain, and if the system knows that it has been raining, even if you don't need to ask for the payment of that insurance, you will be paid in your bank account just directly, thanks to blockchain. So I'm sure that it will arrive one moment, and my feeling is that really it's going very, very, very fast, and probably all these big, I don't know, the Baker and McKenzie, Cuatro Casas, Garrigues, and all these big law firms, they are really making big efforts to have digitalization, and many, I know some of them, some more than 20 projects trying to get into technology very, very fast to make the difference with the smaller ones. So I think it's really necessary for us to audit the technological capacities that we have, and be able to learn quite fast, because the big firms, they have understood that it's a must, and it's there to come.
Thank you, Sara. Dirk, Dan, do you want to say something else, or shall we ask Julie if there are questions for the panel? Because we haven't answered. Thank you, Sara. Sara is leaving us. Thank you so much for having been with us. It has been a pleasure. Bye-bye. Have a nice afternoon. Bye. Dirk, we cannot hear you. I think you are talking.
Sorry, technology.
Okay, fine. That's fine.
I think we can do both. We can at least tie one of the questions to something Sara has said. And well, first question from Nihad, which is about ICOs, their future, and traditional financial intermediaries. I was going to say, and that's probably true on the whole thing, in an established society with an established economic order and players in place, I think it will be many of those traditional players who will be using that technology. So, and I agree with Dan there, blockchain has incredible potential in diverse areas, but not in the disruptive way that it's sometimes described. Take T3N, one of the biggest blockchain consortium. It's folks from IBM and people from Wall Street to do it, because they have figured that makes sense to use that technology. But I don't think that in the developed world, so to speak, where you have all these institutions, where you have many rules in place, that it will overnight disrupt the financial sector. So to answer the question, well, I mean, initial coin offerings, and I'm not an expert, I've had one case to with it. Initial coin offerings are a financial instrument. They're a product. So of course, banks will be offering them. Banks are in fact offering them, helping people to set them up. And it does make sense, because just because you have a new technology doesn't mean that all the particular knowledge on the market, how to deal with it, becomes useless. Because setting up an ICO, doing it properly, knowing the economic risk involved and all, requires experts. And I think, of course, traditional financial intermediaries will adapt that and are already adapting it. I might just comment on the side on what Maria said is, you're feeling that conflict resolution is not necessarily law. I completely agree. There's a great book. It's called, I think it's called Order Without Law. And it deals with neighborhood disputes. It's noble. It's from the 90s. It deals with neighborhood disputes. And they find out that the vast majority of all neighborhood disputes, 99.something%, is settled out of court. It never sees complicated legal risk. So you're right. Of course, communications is another societal means of resolving conflict, and so technology might be. But when you say that we have a lot of bad contracting today, that task is not going to get easier if we have to predefine and code all that stuff into the original contract. I mean, you see how bad we are in foreseeing events with contracts right now, and how vague we sometimes are to make sure that things are working out. It's not I don't right now. I don't see how we could translate all these possibilities into computer executable code. And then that brings me back to what Sarah said, her example of the insurance business, and figure out whether that you get automatically paid when it's raining. That's a great thing. If you agree to that, and if you have the market power to do that, and you have sensors that say, okay, it rained, here's the money, that's good. But you don't need a blockchain for that. You need an Internet of Things approach. You need a database. You need working communications, and you need a customer who's willing to accept that. You can have that today. And now the last, and then I'm done with it. And I think that's where Dan and I agree again. When in the absence of such trust, so in environments where you don't have it, and we're talking of course developing countries, for example, or parts of the internet where you don't know who the other party is, then of course something that guarantees accuracy and trust comes into play, and there are huge chances for applying that. If I was a developing country, I'm not sure I would invest in building up a land registry without blockchain. But if I had one, like say Germany has one, that is working, that does all the things a blockchain approach would have, I don't see why they should feel any urgency to go into that huge change process and build it on the blockchain. So I think that would be my take on it.
Let me, and if I can just jump in, I'll make kind of two quick comments and maybe tie together some of what you both are saying. I don't entirely agree, Dirk, but on the land registry piece, but we can agree to disagree. I think we mostly agree. I think to some extent, to your point, Dirk, and I've heard this said about robots, the question I think is blockchain can versus blockchain should, right? It's like, yeah, robots can do that, but like, do we want robots doing that? I think it's the same thing. Like, there's lots that we could do with the blockchain, but like, where is its most optimal and most immediate opportunity? Like, that's a very different and fair question. Kind of to tie, I think, some of the things that Sarah and Maria, and I think you were saying too, Dirk, together in this sort of conflict resolution piece about technology, you know, and again, maybe to bring it back to some of the things I said, and maybe try to draw a line or connect the dots between that. And I guess just to hit one piece that I didn't say in my introduction, that I think either Maria or Sarah brought up that I think is super relevant is I could not agree more about the increasing irrelevance of and I say increasing, and I say irrelevance with caveats, but of borders, right? I mean, so many of these transactions happen and they touch so many different jurisdictions, and I admit that for a variety of reasons the rule of law is very, very important. And this again gets to my point of like, as we start to think about these types of transactions and these types of interactions that happen across borders, almost in a fluid way, again, I think this is a really interesting opportunity where lawyers who are like the shepherds or the guides or the directors or the facilitators of all of these transactions have a real opportunity to jump in and build new types of structures, new types of infrastructure that can facilitate these types of transactions. The other piece that Sarah mentioned, and again, sort of this gets back to this theme of communication. It may not even necessarily be legal work that they're doing, right? But it's facilitating that communication across borders, connecting people. That again is really key, and I think is a real opportunity. Sarah spoke also about communication and about educating consumers, and I think the one interesting thing that I've learned from Avo, which I think is both a challenge but also a really interesting opportunity, is to channel Dirk, we are so in the early days of bringing even, forget blockchain, bringing our existing legal system into the digital age. And consumers still struggle so mightily, at least in the States, to just understand their legal rights and understand how the legal system, how legal professionals can be helpful to them. Yeah. And so I think this is a huge opportunity just in the kind of on this theme of communications in in encouraging lawyers again to be builders and to be communicators, not necessarily engaged directly in the practice of law, but just in bringing information into the digital age. Again, you can be a blockchain optimist or pessimist, or you can be an internet optimist or pessimist. But one thing that I know the internet is really good at is democratizing information. And so that's a huge opportunity, I think, for lawyers to use technology to be builders, to bring information, legal information and legal advice into the digital age. And really sort of to sort of sum it up, like, again, and bring it back to what I said, like these are the types of tools, whether it's facilitating transactions across borders, or whether it's just better educating consumers. This is where legal professionals can build tools and can build infrastructure that is going to help facilitate this communication. It's not even really that sophisticated from a technical standpoint. I think that is, again, both a real opportunity and for which there's a huge need.
Thank you, Dan. Is there any other question, Julia?
No, we have one question that is a little bit off topic. So I don't know, it's from Nihat. I've sent it to you via chat. I don't know if you've seen the question.
I think I can while he's reading through it, I can relate it, because it might be a bit off topic, but I think it goes exactly in the direction that Dan has just pointed us.
Agreed. Yeah.
The question is is asking, like, do we need special regulation for the crypto world, or can it just be applied by analogy? So can we use existing rules? And I don't know, like, questions to you, so I'll give it to you in a minute. Just my thoughts on that are, one of the challenges is, and Google has this wonderful way of saying it. They always say a 20th century law don't always fit 21st century problems, and they're right. So I would say that is a question to answer for lawyers, and good lawyers find a way of either building that regulation or applying what exists in the way that we reach the outcomes. But here is why it's so crucial for people to understand the technology, like under the surface or under the hood, because if you like regulate by analogy, or even worse, if you have an idea of what you think is the action-reaction pattern, so you regulate this, and then things and companies or consumers will do that. If you do that with an analog understanding of the world, you can very easily go wrong. Example that's far away from blockchain, but people quite often, when talking about data, they say, data is the new oil. And then that triggers a metaphor, and that triggers ideas. So how do we prevent risk from oil? Oh, we make sure it's very safe, and we make sure it's protected. And it goes as far as people are thinking. In the end, they're regulating the metaphor. They like direct action-reaction pattern there is not from what actually happens. So I'd say we can probably regulate it by analogy, but we got to be very careful where blockchain, through the market forces in place, or through the way the technology works, is different from, I don't know, for example, traditional securities. And when we reach that point, we need new regulation, because otherwise we can't reach the goal of that regulation. And that's why it's so fundamentally important that lawyers and the people who make laws, right, who quite often have a legal background, or lawyers themselves, understand how these things are working. So that was just the opportunity I saw to hammer that point home. I'll get it to you, Dan.
Yeah, love it. No, amen. And I may steal your regulating the metaphor. That's great. That's so interesting. I would even go further on the Google point and say, in some cases, we're applying 19th century law to 21st century problems, which is even more problematic. And I think this gets really to the crux of one of the things we're talking about. I mean, on some levels, I never thought that I'd find myself in the libertarian camp, but in some levels, I sort of wish, I sort of would like to see ICOs be a little bit less regulated, and here's the reason I can make that argument and tie it back to what we're talking about. Because, and I think this is exactly sort of the note that Dirk was striking, although he may not agree with my libertarian tendencies, is understanding the mechanics of what ICOs are and what cryptocurrencies are and what ultimately blockchain is is what's going to empower us to make good decisions about how we can use this technology. And so if we just jump in and regulate it and say it's exactly like X or exactly like Y, or hey, public, we need to protect you from this thing, I think we lose some of the opportunity that that this technology has inherent in what it is. You know, the way I think about it, and I said this earlier, is all it's digital scarcity, right? And we've seen runs on so-called scarce things, right? Going again, European reference, the one that we use in the States all the time is like the tulip frenzy in the Netherlands back in like, what was it, like the 16 or 1700s, right? Or the artificially, again, another European reference, the artificially inflated cost of diamonds in light of the monopoly that De Beers enjoys. Like, it's all just, you know, I mean, it's all just, it's scarcity, right? That's what we've created, is a way that we have digital scarcity. And I think the economic understanding of like what that is and how it works, and then what it looks like in a digital landscape, is really interesting. And so I guess, again, I'd be a little nervous to see us like jump right in and regulate it. On the other hand, I totally get that people are losing a lot of money, and people are being deceived, and like that is definitely problematic, and that's the place the legal system should step in. But, you know, channeling this notion of like understanding what this technology is before you go to try to use it, let alone regulate it, there's a part of me that wants to see a little more flexibility there.
Thank you, Dan. Julia, any other question, or can we just finish the session?
Nihat sent another question. I've sent it. I've sent it to you as well via chat.
I have not. So I operate largely. This is going to be such an ugly American comment. I operate largely in the United States, and Avo is U.S. only. So I have not dug into the GDPR at all, except for the fact that I keep getting emails from all of the services that I use that have incidental European users that are warning themselves against. So if Maria or Dirk know anything about GDPR, I'd happily pass that one off to them. Again, I think what's fascinating about it.
So what is the question exactly? Because I cannot.
It's in the chat, but I was just going to say the fascinating thing about it is, again, this speaks to this borderless world that we're living in, where like I'm an American lawyer who has nothing to do with the GDPR and whose work largely has nothing to do with GDPR, and yet it's affecting me, and I think it will affect the privacy regime here in the US. And that's, again, another interesting way where like beginning to build that connective tissue is a real opportunity. But that's really all I have to say about that.
Well, this question that you're posing us on GDPR, I think, has a lot to do with exactly what I was mentioning before. I give you an example. Here in Europe, Facebook works in all countries. In Germany, apparently, the authorities have asked Facebook to settle down a branch. They told them, if you want to play and make money with my consumers, the German ones, then you settle down here some offices. Whilst here in Spain, there are no offices. If I have a problem with Facebook, I have to go to the US and find a nice lawyer and ask him to help me, or find a nice lawyer here in Spain who speaks English and knows something about the American legislation. As a consumer, I think that we shouldn't be handling with these kind of issues. I think that if a company makes money in a country with consumers, we consumers are not obliged to learn different legal systems, learn different languages, understand the nuances of the different countries. I mean, that would imply asking us something which is impossible to cope with. So in my opinion, that the GDPR has extraterritorial effects has some logic, because we need to protect ourselves from in certain moments, like the concrete example I gave you. How is it technically possible? I don't know. I think I'm going to say something completely that I shouldn't say, but I think that complying with this kind of regulation is technically impossible. That's my feeling. I always say a sentence in private, which is sometimes you need to choose to be an entrepreneur or to cope with the law. And it's an option, is or you do A or you do B, because a lot of the legislation and obligations that you as a company have are so complicated and demand so much time from your employees that you as an entrepreneur really need to choose. Or I go with the law, I fulfill the law, or I go on and I do my business. And that's also something we should think about what we are doing, because a lot of these regulations on privacy and like, for instance, the ones that apply on consumer as well, protection and transparency, are so complicated. They are vertical laws, they are sectorial, the insurance companies have got one, the bank companies have got another one, that it has become nearly impossible for a company or an in-house lawyer to understand them. And the more the evolution of the trade goes on being international, the more complicated it will be. So extraterritoriality has some logic, but the ideal thing will be to have a world law. Is it possible? The Mercatore law. We probably need to go to that, or maybe to go to more simple things, to a blockchain that guarantees more things, because things have gone too complicated. I don't know if you want to add something, Dirk and Dan.
I would like to quickly weigh in on that, and I think GDPR is the prime example of what happens if people lack the technological understanding of the thing they want to regulate, but still want to do something. I'm going to be very outspoken about it. It is the most catastrophic law that has been passed. I have no idea since when. We're effectively cutting ourselves off an entire industry that's database, and we're making it very, very hard for new companies, small companies in Europe to compete with existing players. They went out to regulate Google and Facebook, and they have created the most incredible tool for those huge companies to protect their business. If you want to talk about people who really, really understand GDPR, you go out to Silicon Valley. They've got it figured out. And I mean, really, I think here's what happened. People who came up with GDPR in the beginning, they live in a world where they think that in the internet, on the internet, people are trading addresses. Remember, that was a thing 10 years ago. Like, suddenly people were selling 5 million email addresses, and that's something they want to regulate. That's something I've heard people who make those laws say, that is a part of what's going on. They wanted to regulate Facebook and Google, but they have very limited understanding of the complexity technically that's going on, because nobody, I mean, if you want a prime example of that, look at the questions the European Parliament asked Mark Zuckerberg, or even Congress asked Mark Zuckerberg. Those people are completely off the charts. Here they go and create a law affecting everyone with consequences. Nobody knows what's going on. I'll give you my personal take. I'm not going to say I would be less outspoken on just ignore it. But we have effectively heard a European Commissioner saying that in the first 2 years, if you're not a prime target, nothing's going to happen. We as a law school go through hours and hours of complying with that law, and in the end, and that is, I think, the most crucial thing, is what we try to protect: privacy. I'm not so sure people want that protected. Facebook users, they do not necessarily care. They put anything and everything on there to be able to exchange, and that is a choice people make, right? So here we have a completely detached regulator who regulates something, wants to go in one direction, unfortunately, because he doesn't get the mechanics, as Dan put it, the consequences of the regulation. So he goes there and creates something completely different. And I think the only good thing, and I have been an outspoken enemy of the whole thing, but I think the only good thing is, I bet a high number of lawyers become millionaires and probably even richer through that. That is the biggest gift the European Union could give us, because you can charge companies incredible amounts to build GDPR compliant things, and in the end, nobody knows what GDPR compliant is. So I think we won't see full compliance by anyone. It will hurt the economy, and it's the prime example of why we should have people understanding the market forces and how the things technically work together. In the end, to answer the question, after all that ranting, I'm sorry, is it technically possible to apply different data regulations? Sure it is. I mean, of course, I mean, it's not like nobody goes through these databases and, I don't know, like in an agricultural world, harvests some and puts them in a box. I mean, if you want to apply particular rules, I mean, gosh, you just give it another column in the database, say apply European, yes, no, yes, and then you process it differently. So I think it's technically possible. I think it's super hard for new players to enter the market, for startups, and I definitely tell everyone who is in Europe and wants to run a data-driven business model, make sure you get the money you can from your state or the European Union, and as soon as you can, move out, because the world's hard enough, and figuring out and competing with those huge companies is hard enough. You don't need GDPR to make your life even more difficult. But that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add on that, and I looked it up on YouTube and I was going to share it, but we're past time. There's a great, just to Dirk's point, there's a great exchange between a United States senator by the name of Orrin Hatch, who is definitely one of the older United States senators, and Mark Zuckerberg, where Hatch sort of, bears down and acts like he's going to ask Zuckerberg this really hard question, and he goes, your service is free, so how do you sustain a service like that? And Zuckerberg is like, I mean, this guy, I mean, Zuckerberg has been trained and thought and talked to dozens of lawyers about how to answer these questions. And finally, he's like, we sell advertisements. And it was like revelatory for Hatch that the answer was that simple. I mean, just to your point, Dirk, about how uneducated legislators can be about this, like that, I completely concur. Like that is a huge problem. And again, you want to flip it around. Hopefully, an opportunity for lawyers who frequently advise and work with these folks to educate them more effectively about first of all, how these technologies work and where the risks are. But I mean, it was so fascinating. I watched that and I was baffled. It was crazy.
Well, it's 5 minutes late, so I think we ought to finish. It has been really my pleasure to have you both, Dirk. Dan, Sara is gone, but we thank her already. I hope that it was amusing to everybody. I really had a lot of fun. This is recorded, so whoever wants to listen to it again can do it, and those who couldn't attend today's webinar can do it in the future. Thank you, Julia, for coordinating us. Thank you to everybody, and I hope to discuss about other issues in the future with you too. Have a very, very nice rest of the day.
It was
bye-bye.
Everyone.